Hi, and welcome to the Why I Love podcast, and this episode is all about Damien Rice. When I was a really little kid, the main music in our house was sort of Christian rock for kids. It was very weird. Then my mum would have like a really odd collection of vinyls, so some weeks it was terrible music like David Essex, and then other weeks it was Pink Floyd or Queen. And then when we first got a CD player, I think the first thing me and my sister did was buy like a Disney CD and a Simpsons CD. It was only quite a few years later that I started getting into music a bit more. We used to travel a lot, and I would pick up like the hit CDs and the now CDs from service station bargain bins. And these introduced me to music like the Britpop music, Oasis and Blur, and for a short spell in the 90s I followed my sister's footsteps and got really into like dance and Ibiza trance music. But it wasn't really till the early 2000s when I was properly buying CDs for myself and buying albums rather than just mixtapes. At the time, I thought my taste in music was quite eclectic, I guess. Looking back now, it's very stereotypical of the kind of person I am, I suppose. I liked indie music, I liked some rock music, I liked a little bit of rap music when it was like Eminem and that. And then I really got into like the sort of depressive, hate my parents kind of rock as well, with bands like Stained. A lot of that music was designed for angry teenagers, and although I do still like it more from a nostalgia point now, I think when I kind of hit my mid-teens, going into like 15, 16, I started like going out with girls, and suddenly that anger became heartbreak. And one day on the radio I heard this song. It wasn't like the kind of music that I was into, but I just really clicked with it. It was quite slow, seemed quite emotional at the time, and it really just worked with how I was feeling. And that song was called Cannonball by Damien Rice, from the album O, which ended up being one of my all-time favourite albums. I couldn't get enough of Cannonball when I first heard it, and I went out and bought the album straight away. I remember getting really excited for this new kind of music that I was suddenly into, and I took out the wrapping, put it in the CD player, listened to the whole thing, and I didn't like it. I remember thinking it was just too slow, too boring. I was used to kind of angry, heavy music with swearing and drug references and all these stupid things that you think are cool as a teenager. So after listening to Cannonball quite a bit more, I just ignored the other songs on the album and then eventually stuck it in a drawer, forgot about it. And I think like a year probably passed before I listened to the album again. And that all happened because I was watching a film called Closer. At that point I was in uni, I was studying film, and I was ordering and watching hundreds of DVDs. The film's okay, but the soundtrack is what got me. It had this song on it, which was on all the trailers and was like a big part of the film. And I remember just really enjoying this song, and when I looked up to see who it was by, I found out that it was Damien Rice again. So I went and dug out that album and listened to it again, and I still didn't like it. At the time, I listened to it loads and I just couldn't get into it at all. I went into it knowing what to expect more this time. I think originally I wanted more songs like Cannonball, which is probably Damien Rice's most sort of poppy, catchy song. And this time I didn't go in wanting that, but it still didn't jump out to me. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more, but I still ended up just sort of putting it to the side. And now that could have been the end of my journey into the music of Damien Rice. I could quite easily have just put that on the side, eventually be clearing my room, put it in a bag for charity, and never hear him again. I mean, most of you probably don't really even know who he is. He isn't huge. He isn't on the radio that much anymore. I could easily have never heard him again, and I'd have just moved on to some other band. But in the summer of that year, I had just moved home from living away for my second year of uni, and I was in a pretty dark place. I'd just bought an Xbox 360 and it came with a game called Oblivion. Now, Oblivion probably deserves its own podcast, so I won't talk about that game too much, but for those who don't know, it's a massive open world RPG from the creators of Morrowind, Skyrim, and the whole Elder Scrolls series. At the time, I really needed a place to escape to, and that game was perfect. It was like transporting to another world. And in Oblivion, you could just walk around forests for hours and hours, stumbling across missions, finding things to do. You didn't need a goal in that game. It was just great to just waste time in. And one of the amazing things about the 360 was that you could rip your CDs to it. The Xbox could actually take out the music from each game and replace that music with yours. I thought this feature was incredible and just got every CD I owned and ripped it to the Xbox, including Damien Rice. As I was adventuring around these woods, I came to know kind of what sort of music I liked to listen to for that game, what music was fitted most with the environments and with the pace of the game. And when Damien Rice came on, it matched perfectly. It was big and grand in places, but also it was small and quiet in places. It wasn't angry, it wasn't too modern. There's a real folksy feel to the songs, which kind of fitted the game quite well. I ended up playing Oblivion for over 200 hours, and I think a good 2/3 of that was probably spent with me listening to that one Damien Rice album. I can't really tell you what it was that changed my mind. I think it was the way it did fit with the game, but also maybe it just took time. I think having it on repeat, not listening to it too intently, it seeped in, and before I knew it, I had songs that I liked that I didn't really understand. And then when I listened to them more carefully, suddenly I started to understand why I liked them. And before long, I was on YouTube looking for live versions of songs. I was watching interviews about Damien Rice and the band, learning all about the different people in it, all the relationships of the band members, and just generally being a little bit obsessed. And then at the end of 2006, Damien's new album came out. Now, for me, this hadn't been a very long wait at all, but some of his biggest fans had been waiting for over 4 years for this. And with the new album came a new tour. And this was my first real chance to go and see him live. So as soon as tickets were available, I booked for me and my girlfriend at the time to go and see him in Manchester. At this point in life, I'd only ever really seen big bands play. I'd been to see Coldplay, I think, by then, in like a huge football stadium. I'd been to see Snow Patrol, and we just kind of sat on seats far away in a huge theatre. I'd never really been to anything like this before, which turned out to be Damien Rice and the band just in a really intimate venue. We arrived early, and I was like literally at the very front, meters away from this guy, being able to watch him sing, watch the band play all the instruments, and I loved it. I know everyone has probably had this experience with a different band, and they're thinking, well, why is he so special? Why is this Damien Rice the band so special? They're probably not. They're just really special to me, I guess. Like, everyone will have had this with their own band, but this was the one for me. This is where I saw people really performing, really giving it their all, really feeling it. And I know this is probably weird to hear, because I think a lot of people think that Damien Rice is like a pop star, a singer-songwriter who, you know, probably has 100 people producing the music, and he was around the same time as the James Blunts and all the others like that who were more like that, were kind of manufactured. But Damien was actually just an Irish guy in a band with some other Irish people. He fell out with them, went and made his own band, and had this one huge breakout album. And that's not to say that he doesn't have producers and work with music industry. Of course he does, but he's kind of always kept that small indie thing about him, which I really like. I mean, he gave up music for a while and just busked around Europe because he felt like he was getting too famous. When the X Factor wanted to cover one of his songs, he sold them the rights and then gave 500 grand to charity. Every year he still goes out onto the streets of Dublin and performs with other musicians and just gives back music to people for free. And when his third album finally released, many years after his first, he even put in clauses in his contracts to say that he originally only wanted to perform in intimate settings for his hardest of fans, and he didn't want to go around promoting it and do interviews. And I find that really interesting for somebody who, to me, is such a big star, purposely goes out of his way to not become one. There's so much that I could say about Damien Rice. There's rumours about having to work with him, how he's a perfectionist and a nightmare, and although that stuff probably means I would never want to be friends with a guy, it totally makes me respect him. I think that's an incredible thing with artists and musicians are just so into what they do that they embody it completely, that they let it take over their lives. And it might not be healthy, but I can't help but always feel something towards people like that just really go full in. It's something I've never been able to do. I've always been a half and half person. I'll get excited about something and then I'll give up and move on to something else. So when I see people like this, and I don't just mean musicians as well, there's a great example of this is a show called Jim and Andy, which is all about Jim Carrey, the actor, who, again, you're probably thinking Jim Carrey's just that guy from Ace Ventura who was in The Mask and does these silly comedies, but if you watch that show, I think it'll totally change your mind on who he is. And this is the kind of people I'm talking about, where you see they kind of live for what they do. I will never be one of those people, but I'm totally inspired by them. I just think they're incredible, and that's one of the big things of why I love Damien Rice so much. But aside from Damien himself and the band members, the past band members now really, it's not just them that I loved. It wasn't just the music I loved, it's the experiences, as always with this podcast, it's the experiences that I've had around that music. So, like I said earlier, the obsession with Oblivion, whenever I hear the album O, and especially the song Older Chess on that album, it just completely takes me back still to playing Oblivion. There's a song called Amy on that album, which just completely reminds me of these amazing nights I used to have with one of my friends, Nick. We'd get drunk together before a night out, and he would play his guitar, and we would sing along to that song. And we would sing along to loads of songs, but that one in particular just always reminds me of him. It's amazing. We probably only did that for a few weeks or a few months when I was single at one point, but it was just so much fun. Like, that's all connected in my mind to these amazing nights out and these amazing times with him. And then when Damien finally released his third album, I got to go see him live again, and this time with somebody new. It was my fiancée. Now, not only did she agree to go and see him perform, not really knowing many of his songs at all, she also agreed to go to Ireland with me to go and see him perform. So we got to go to Dublin on holiday, which is Damien's hometown. He was playing there in this park. It was just incredible. I got food poisoning that night, and that didn't even spoil it. I was listening to half of the warm-up packs from the Portaloo, but I still absolutely loved that show. The music was so good. He changed all these songs live. He got everyone involved. He did all this amazing stuff with the sound, and even at the end when it overran so he couldn't play on the speakers anymore because it was too late, so he just played acoustic for us, and we were right near the front again so we could really hear it. It was just amazing. And that night, me and Katie danced along to a song called Colour Me In, which is just a sad but incredibly romantic love song. And you know when you just get that feeling like everything is perfect? That was that moment for me. And a year later, we played that song at our wedding for our first dance. And things like that are just going to live on with me forever. I don't listen to a lot of Damien Rice now because I am happily married and, you know, I haven't got a broken heart, which is a lot of what his music's about. But I don't think I'll ever forget these moments, and whenever I listen to those albums again, it's like going back in time through some of my greatest and some of my worst moments in life. And that's why I'll always love Damien Rice.